Imagine we open on a bleak, frozen ocean somewhere in the far northern seas. An endless expanse of ice, cold winds that howl across the desolate landscape, and a ship struggling to break through the ice floes. The year is the late 18th century, and a young, ambitious explorer named Robert Walton has embarked on an expedition to reach the North Pole, or at least penetrate farther into the Arctic than anyone before him. He dreams of fame, of unraveling the mysteries of Earth's most remote regions. But what he finds out there, in the deadly chill at the top of the world, is far stranger and more harrowing than any geographical discovery he could have imagined. In the midst of this perilous journey, his ship becomes trapped in ice. The crew, though steadfast, is frightened and uncertain. One morning, as the gray light filters across the ice, Walton and his men spot something astonishing: a gaunt, half-frozen figure drifting toward them on a fragment of ice. The stranger is barely alive, clinging to the last threads of his strength. The crew brings him aboard, determined to save his life. They do not yet realize that they have rescued a man whose story, once he is well enough to speak, will unravel a chain of events so haunting and tragic that it might reshape their understanding of what it means to be human, to create life, and to face the consequences of one's own ambition. This stranger is Victor Frankenstein, and as he begins to recover from his ordeal, he entrusts Walton with the terrible tale of how he came to be here in the Arctic wastes, chasing something monstrous and elusive. Walton, who has been writing letters to his beloved sister back in England, takes careful note. Through Victor's sorrowful narrative, we journey back to his youthful days in Geneva, Switzerland, and trace the path that led him to the brink of madness and heartbreak. Victor Frankenstein's story is both a confession and a warning, a testament to the destructive power of unchecked ambition, the loneliness of the misunderstood, and the moral responsibilities of creators for their creations. Victor Frankenstein was born into a well-to-do, loving family. Raised in Geneva, he enjoyed an idyllic childhood. His father, Alphonse Frankenstein, was a kind, honorable man, and his mother, Caroline, was compassionate and caring. They took an Elizabeth Lavenza, an orphan girl of noble birth, whom Victor came to love dearly as they grew up together like siblings. But from the start, there was a sense that Elizabeth represented something pure, a beacon of goodness Victor cherished. They also had Victor's brothers, Ernest and the younger, sweet-natured William, forming a happy, close-knit household. From an early age, Victor was different, marked by an intense intellectual curiosity. He devoured the works of ancient alchemists and natural philosophers, reading about the secrets of life and the possibility of reanimating lifeless matter. Though these old texts were outdated, discredited, and considered pseudoscience, to Victor's young mind they crackled with possibility. He dreamed of discovering the principles of life itself, of seizing nature's secrets and using them to banish disease and death. As he grew older, Victor's father recognized the need for a proper education to channel his son's formidable intellect. Victor set off for the University of Ingolstadt in Germany. There he encountered professors who would shape his destiny. M. Krempe, who dismissed his earlier studies as nonsense, and M. Waldman, who recognized Victor's potential and encouraged him to pursue modern science, chemistry, physiology, the real building blocks of understanding life. Under Waldman's mentorship, Victor threw himself passionately into scientific study, spending days and nights in the lab, obsessed with penetrating the veil between life and death. Victor's studies eventually led him to a horrifying yet enthralling line of inquiry. He believed he could reanimate dead tissue. He did not share his goals openly. The nature of his project was too macabre, too morally dubious. He worked in secret, scavenging charnel houses and graveyards for pieces of corpses. The details are grim. Limbs collected under the cover of darkness, instruments and chemicals that reeked of death. Victor, in his manic fervor, ignored the moral implications. He believed that if he could just do this extraordinary thing, create life, he would become a benefactor to mankind, freeing people from mortality's shadow. It felt almost holy, but it was also a violation of the natural order. After countless days of feverish labor, Victor succeeded. In a candlelit room on a stormy night, the creature, a giant, roughly 8 feet tall, pieced together from various human remains, shuddered into life. But the instant this new being opened its watery, yellow eyes, Victor recoiled in horror. The creature's features were hideous. Its yellowish skin barely covered the muscles and blood vessels beneath. Its black lips were straight and thin, and despite Victor's painstaking efforts, nothing could disguise the patchwork reality of this unnatural body. Instead of euphoria, Victor felt disgust. He had envisioned a beautiful being, a new Adam of his own making. Instead, he beheld an abomination. Overcome with dread and regret, Victor fled from his laboratory and abandoned his creation. Having spent 2 years obsessed with his experiment, Victor now collapsed into a delirious illness. He avoided the laboratory, not daring to face what he had created. Meanwhile, the creature, alone in the world, struggled to understand its existence. It was born fully formed physically, but with the mind of a blank slate, frightened, sensitive, and curious. Finding itself abandoned, it wandered into the world outside. Without guidance or language, it survived on what it could forage. It discovered sensations like cold, hunger, and fear. It longed for companionship and kindness, but met only terror and violence. Everywhere it went, people shrank away in horror or tried to harm it, mistaking it for a monster because of its dreadful appearance. Back in Ingolstadt, Victor's close friend, Henry Clerval, arrived to nurse him back to health. With Henry's kindness and the passage of time, Victor recovered from his nervous breakdown. He tried to bury thoughts of the creature, pretending it was nothing but a nightmare. News from home beckoned him to return. It was then that a letter reached him bearing tragedy. William, the youngest Frankenstein brother, had been found murdered. With a heavy heart, Victor set out for Geneva. At night, beneath the gloomy skies, as he visited the scene of the crime, he glimpsed a massive, distorted figure lurking in the shadows. He realized in a flash of horror that his own creation was responsible. Even worse, a beloved family servant, Justine Moritz, a kind-hearted young woman brought up by the Frankensteins, was accused of the crime, as incriminating evidence was found in her possession. Unable to reveal the truth of his hideous progeny, and terrified of the scandal, Victor remained silent. He watched helplessly as Justine, declaring her innocence but pressured to confess in hope of mercy, was condemned and executed. This moment marked the start of Victor's downward spiral into guilt, despair, and moral torment. The creature, which he had thoughtlessly loosed upon the world, had now claimed 2 innocent lives, William by direct action, and Justine indirectly, through injustice and Victor's silence. Broken by guilt and grief, Victor sought solace in the alpine landscapes near the Frankenstein home. He wandered through sublime scenery, towering mountains, cascading waterfalls, trying to find peace or at least a sense of humility against nature's immense backdrop. It was in these solitary wanderings that the creature found him. The monstrous being approached him on a remote glacier and spoke with surprising eloquence and reason. Victor, enraged and horrified, cursed the creature. but the being pleaded for understanding. How could Victor hate him? It asked, since Victor was the one who created and then abandoned him. Despite Victor's fury, the creature calmly began to recount its life story. It described how, after escaping Victor's workshop, it learned about the world by observing a family of cottagers, the de Lacys. This family, an old blind father and his grown children, lived in a modest home in the forest. They were impoverished but compassionate. The creature secretly watched them through a chink in the wall, gradually learning their language, their customs, their moral values. He absorbed their kindness and yearned to be accepted by them. He even tried to help them secretly by gathering firewood at night. As it acquired speech and a sense of morality from these unsuspecting teachers, the creature came to understand concepts like love, virtue, and justice. But when the creature finally dared to reveal itself to the de Lacy family, hoping the blind old father, unprejudiced by sight, would listen to its pleas, everything went wrong. The old man's children returned unexpectedly, saw the monstrous figure, and reacted with horror and violence. They fled their home in fear, leaving the creature devastated. This crushing rejection taught it that no matter how kind, how learned, or how gentle it tried to be, its grotesque face would damn it in the eyes of humanity. Anger and sadness warred within it. In its despair, it resolved to seek out its creator to demand answers, and ultimately found the path that led it to Switzerland. On the journey, it saved a young girl from drowning only to be shot by a terrified bystander. Wounded in both body and soul, its bitterness against mankind grew. Reaching Geneva, the creature encountered young William Frankenstein, and, hoping a child's innocence would make him more open-minded, tried to befriend him. But the boy panicked, and in the struggle, the creature unintentionally strangled him. Realizing the boy's connection to Victor, it saw William's death as a twisted form of revenge. By framing Justine, it inflicted more pain on Victor's family. Now face to face with Victor on the glacier, the creature admitted all this. But it did not seek blind vengeance. It longed for companionship. It asked Victor to create a mate for it, a female being just as hideous, who would understand its condition and share its life, so it would no longer be alone. In exchange, the creature promised that the two would vanish into the wilds of South America, never to trouble humanity again. At first, Victor refused. The idea of repeating his horrible act seemed unimaginable. But the creature's argument was powerful. It was Victor who owed it some measure of happiness, since he brought it into the world so miserably equipped. Feeling a deep responsibility and hoping to rid himself of the creature's menace, Victor reluctantly agreed. He would create a female companion. The creature, satisfied with the promise, left Victor to his work. Haunted by his agreement, Victor returned home, but he found no happiness there. He was burdened by secrets and horrors he could share with no one. He tried to postpone his dark task, but the creature's shadow seemed to loom everywhere. Eventually, he traveled to England and then to a remote Scottish island to work in isolation. Henry Clerval accompanied him to England, marveling at the sights and enjoying the journey, while Victor was increasingly preoccupied and distant. Fear ate at him, fear of what he was about to unleash upon the world. If he gave the creature a mate, might they breed and create a whole race of monsters? Could these beings become a threat to humanity? Might the female, once animated, reject the creature and cause even more misery? Victor's conscience tormented him. He was stuck between pity for the creature's suffering and terror of making the situation worse. One night, at the brink of completion, Victor looked up and saw the creature's ghastly form grinning at him through the window of his workshop on the Scottish island. Overcome by revulsion and fear of the consequences, Victor destroyed the half-finished female. He tore her apart before bringing her to life. With a howl of anguish, the creature vanished into the darkness, but not before vowing revenge. It swore that it would be with Victor on his wedding night, a chilling promise that lingered in Victor's mind, sowing seeds of dread. The next day, Victor tried to dispose of the remains of his aborted creation in the sea, but storms blew him off course. He washed ashore in Ireland, where a fresh horror awaited him. Henry Clerval's body had been found strangled. The local authorities, suspicious of Victor's sudden arrival, arrested him for the crime. For months, Victor languished in prison, sick and nearly insane with grief. Though eventually he was cleared of the crime, there was evidence he wasn't near the murder scene. His spirit was broken. He had lost his dearest friend to his own unholy meddling. Each death traced back to him and the creature he had unleashed. His father arrived to care for him, and once Victor recovered enough, they returned to Geneva. By now, the family had gone through so much sorrow. William was dead, Justine was executed, and now Henry was gone. Victor's only hope lay in some semblance of future happiness. He still loved Elizabeth, who had been waiting patiently for him all these years. They decided to marry, hoping that wedlock might bring peace and allow Victor to heal from these horrifying traumas. But Victor knew the creature's ominous warning. "I shall be with you on your wedding night." Interpreting this as a threat to himself, Victor armed himself and planned to confront the creature after the wedding. Perhaps he still believed he could face the monster and end the cycle of misery. The wedding took place, and for a brief time, there was a fragile joy. Elizabeth was radiant and kind, truly devoted to Victor. They traveled to a remote cottage where they would spend their wedding night. Victor paced nervously, expecting the creature to burst in at any moment. He told Elizabeth to retire to her bedchamber while he checked the grounds. But while he searched, panic mounting, he suddenly heard Elizabeth's scream echo through the halls. Rushing back, he found her lifeless body, strangled by those enormous hands. The creature had not meant to threaten Victor's life, but to destroy all that Victor loved. In that instant, all that was dear to Victor perished. Soon afterward, Alphonse Frankenstein, grief-stricken at the cumulative tragedies, died as well. Now utterly alone, mother, father, brothers, friend, and beloved wife all gone, Victor was consumed by vengeance. Any traces of guilt or pity he once felt toward the creature hardened into hatred. He swore a great and terrible oath. He would pursue the creature across the world and destroy it or die trying. Thus began a relentless chase. The creature, grimly satisfied that it had inflicted a pain equal to what it had suffered, led Victor on a chase through Europe, then toward the frozen Arctic. The two adversaries became entwined in a dance of death, one always just out of reach of the other. Following clues left by the creature, sometimes bits of food, sometimes mocking messages, Victor tracked it northward. He pushed himself and his sledge dogs past the boundaries of human endurance. He nearly starved, froze, and drowned, but still he pressed on. In the vast silence of the Arctic, their mutual hatred burned bright against a background of white emptiness. It was in this desperate state that Walton's ship finally encountered Victor, half dead on the ice, still chasing his elusive foe. Now, aboard Walton's ship, Victor unburdened himself of his tragic tale, hoping to warn Walton against reckless ambition. He implored Walton not to follow his own path of monstrous hubris. Here, Victor's character had changed drastically from the ardent student of Ingolstadt. He was a ruined man racked by the agony of loss and regret. Walton, deeply moved, began to question his own ambitious pursuit of the North Pole. Should he risk his crew and his life for glory, knowing the cost that ambition had exacted from Victor? Shortly after telling his story, Victor's health deteriorated further. He lingered for some time, still cursing the creature, still longing to fulfill his vow of revenge, but he was too weak. Eventually, Victor Frankenstein died aboard the ship. With his death, it seemed the last hope of punishing the creature had vanished. That very night, Walton and his crew, who had been debating whether to continue north or turn back, witnessed something extraordinary. The creature appeared on the ship, slipping aboard silently. It stood over Victor's corpse, filled with a strange mixture of remorse, grief, and self-loathing. In eloquent words, it spoke to Walton, confessing the misery of its existence. It had never wanted to be evil, never wanted to harm the innocent. It had longed for love and companionship, only to be met with universal rejection. The creature's violent acts, it claimed, were born out of despair and a desperate attempt to make its creator feel the same loneliness and pain it had endured. Now, seeing Victor dead, its father, its god, its enemy, left the creature adrift in regret. It realized that the cycle of vengeance had led only to emptiness. Without Victor, the creature had no purpose. It declared that it would go far away to the northernmost reaches of the ice and end its own life by building a funeral pyre. On that pyre, it would consume itself in flames, erasing every trace of its cursed existence. Then it departed into the dark, frozen wastes, its form soon lost to sight. Walton and his crew, shaken and full of sorrow, decided to turn the ship southward, returning home with a cautionary tale of ambition and horror. By the time this story concludes, the audience is left with profound questions. What does it mean to be responsible for our creations, be they children, art, inventions, or scientific breakthroughs? Victor Frankenstein's greatest sin was not that he tried to understand life's secrets. It was his failure to take responsibility for what he created. Instead of caring for the creature and teaching it, he abandoned it, leaving it to the cruelties of the world. This dereliction of duty set the tragedy in motion. The novel also wrestles with the idea of appearances versus inner nature. The creature is hideous to the eye, and because of that, nearly everyone treats it as a monster. Yet in its earliest days, it is gentle, curious, and caring. Only rejection, isolation, and hatred turn it into a murderer. Mary Shelley's story suggests that the monstrousness we fear in others is often of our own making. Prejudice, fear, and cruelty can warp even the purest spirit into something vengeful. There's a powerful moral argument here about empathy and understanding. Had anyone shown the creature genuine kindness and acceptance, how different might its fate have been? Another central theme is the danger of unchecked ambition and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. Victor yearned to conquer death, to become a creator of life, without understanding the moral and ethical weight of that power. His great intellect and passion led him down a path of destruction. Similarly, Walton's quest for the North Pole mirrors Victor's misguided ambition. By listening to Victor's cautionary tale, Walton learns that some conquests are not worth the potential moral cost. He values human life and returns home, saving himself and his crew from a pointless demise. Beyond these moral lessons, Frankenstein also reflects on loneliness and alienation. Both Victor and the creature suffer immense isolation. Victor isolates himself in obsessive study, cutting himself off from family and friends. The creature is isolated from birth, finding no companion or equal in the entire world. Elizabeth and Henry represent warmth and connection, but they are brutally snatched away, emphasizing the tragic consequences of being cut adrift from human love and support. The setting of Frankenstein shifts across Europe and beyond, providing a rich, atmospheric backdrop. Early on, we have Geneva's calm lake and comfortable homes, symbolizing innocence and family love. Then Ingolstadt's university town, with its laboratories and libraries, is the birthplace of Victor's obsession. The natural world, sublime mountains, vast lakes, and glaciers, often serves as a mirror to Victor's inner turmoil. In these stunning landscapes, he tries to find solace or at least perspective. The final chase takes us into the Arctic wastes, an inhospitable realm where human constructs, morality, civilization, reason, feel tenuous and fragile. Here, stripped down to survival and vengeance, both creator and creation confront their final destiny. The harshness of the ice and cold echoes the chill in Victor's heart and the hopelessness that befalls them both. Throughout, Shelley uses these settings not just as scenery, but as reflections of the characters' emotional states. The majesty and terror of nature stand in contrast to the ugliness of what transpires between man and monster. Humanity tries to bend nature to its will, but nature remains indifferent, grand, and dangerous. Ultimately, the quest for control over nature, over life, leads to ruin. The emotional journey of Frankenstein is intense and turbulent. We begin with curiosity and wonder as we hear about Victor's dreams of discovering life's secret. We sense his youthful optimism and the warmth of his family. But as the story unfolds, the tone grows darker. First, the horror of the creature's birth, then the creeping sense of guilt and dread as it roams free. The murders shock us, and Justine's execution brings a painful sense of injustice. The middle portion of the novel, where the creature tells its story, stirs our empathy. We see how it yearned for kindness and recoiled at cruelty, how it might have been good if given a chance. It's a heartbreaking irony. The monster is perhaps the most sensitive soul in the book, yet fated to be seen as evil. As Victor and the creature become locked in a cycle of revenge, the mood becomes tragic and inescapable. With each death, William, Justine, Henry, Elizabeth, the emotional stakes rise, and we realize no happy ending is possible. By the end, when Victor dies and the creature mourns over his body, we feel an overwhelming sense of loss and remorse. Neither character emerges victorious. Instead, their story stands as a testament to miscommunication, failed responsibility, and the destructive power of resentment. In closing, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is far more than a simple horror story. It's a layered narrative about humanity's capacity for invention and destruction, about the need for compassion, and about the responsibilities that come with power. Through Victor's confession and the creature's eloquent testimony, we gain insight into the human condition. The story encourages us to reflect on what we owe each other, how we judge by appearances, and where we draw the line between daring exploration and moral responsibility. The final image of the creature disappearing into the Arctic night remains haunting. It vanishes to die alone, taking with it all its sorrow and bitterness, and leaving us to ponder what might have been if only empathy had won out over fear. Even though Frankenstein is set in a distant past and a time of early scientific exploration, its themes remain timeless. They speak to any era in which humans push the boundaries of knowledge and power, reminding us that our creations, be they technological, scientific, or social, will reflect our own moral character. If we fail to guide them with empathy and understanding, we risk creating something we cannot bear to face. This is the tragic, cautionary tale that Victor Frankenstein imparts to Robert Walton, and by extension, to all of us. It's not just a story of monsters and murder, but a profound meditation on love, responsibility, identity, and the fragile nature of human aspirations. By the end, we understand why Victor chased his creation into the cold ends of the earth, and why, after hearing this story, Walton decides to turn his ship around. We, too, are left to carry these lessons with us, understanding that knowledge and power are not inherently evil, but must be tempered with ethics, empathy, and a profound respect for the lives we touch.